Okay, so I love VeggieTales. It's one of the first cartoons I watched in my life, and I remember fondly of the series, and I still do to this day. And since the 10/10 video won't be happening, I had the marvelous idea that maybe we should rank all the episodes of VeggieTales from the 90s. And you're probably wondering, why the 90s? Because if I did all the episodes in one video, I'd lose my absolute mind. So let's get started. From Where's God When I'm Scared to Larry Boy and the Rumor Weed, here goes the ranking of the 90s episodes.
Cheer up, rock forever. Cheer up, rock we never die. Cheer up, rock forever.
I mean, what can we really say about this episode? It's a sing-along episode. There's not much substance to it. The cutscenes between the songs were pretty entertaining though. So this episode wasn't the biggest waste of time. The next episode on this list isn't necessarily bad either, but for obvious reason it has to be towards the top. I didn't watch this episode until I got a little bit older, but I did enjoy watching the story that was in between each song. But like with number 12, this is still a sing-along episode, so it's not getting any lower than this spot. The moment that I particularly enjoyed was the Archibald speech, when he got on top of that desk and he made like a real grand speech and all that. It's pretty funny, and that's probably about it too. I feel like the rewatchability is already low considering that this is a Christmas episode, and I'm not gonna go on a nostalgia binge and watch any Christmas episode in the middle of August or something. That's stupid. Yeah, no, I've made this joke before. Alright, carry on people, let's go. Let's forget I made this joke, come on now. The episode just feels pretty tame compared to others, and that's saying a lot considering that this is a Christian cartoon. Also, that little toy from this episode was pretty lame. I forget his name. It's like Dave or something. Either way, they give him a song and it sucks completely. Like, it's just so generic. Basically, this episode is just Rack, Shack, and Benny, but I had to drink eggnog while watching it. And there's not a lot to it besides meh. This is the first episode of the show, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's bad, but it doesn't have the charm of the later episodes, which makes sense. It's the first episode of the show. That's how it goes for most TV shows. It's probably one of the shorter episodes of the show, which makes sense, of course, because like, you know, they didn't know what they were doing. They're just trying to get it out on time. But heck, even the freaking silly song got cut off fast.
I got it.
Stop right this instant, won't you?
Most of the jokes weren't really that funny either. But one thing I did enjoy was how Daniel in the Lion's Den was basically a musical. There was at least a song every 2 minutes. I wish VeggieTales in this time period would have done a lot more of that, because believe it or not, back then that was a pretty high concept for them. All in all, this was a pretty average episode of the show, I suppose, but it was a good way to start the series. If you really like the show or you just remember it again, you should definitely check out the audio commentary for the first episode. When I found it out, it was probably one of the most inspiring stories for me as an artist and creator. Check it out, please. Link in description. This is the second episode, and I think this episode has some of the same issues with the first, in that the show hadn't come into its own yet, and it was still learning how to get its own identity. But in this episode, the comedy does improve significantly. Two stories in this episode, while being tame, are still enjoyable enough to watch compared to the first episode. This one in particular was very trial and error for the series, but it's still a decent episode. I can sort of see where the legacy of VeggieTales would start from this episode, with certain elements and how characters interact with one another play into the stories. But at this point, there was a lot of work still needing to be done on this show. Also, why the heck is this the only episode where the trees and sun have faces? Even as a kid, that was strange to me. As good as this episode is, it doesn't really do much for me. It's definitely kind of bland compared to later episodes on this list. Bob, Larry, and Junior are when they're together on screen like this. I wouldn't call it bad, but they don't just bounce off of each other like Bob and Larry would, or like Bob and Junior do. It's always a straight man, while Larry and Junior are usually the people that have to learn a lesson. So when there's two of them, it's kind of like, it's not as interesting as it should be. When I look back and watch this episode, most of its characters are just sitting around and talking for most of the episode. I don't want to knock this entire episode down because it's not that bad. I really like the flying car chase scene sequence. It's probably one of the most thrilling things in early VeggieTales, and that's saying a lot. And the Dance of the Cucumber was a really good silly song. It single-handedly taught me Spanish. See, watch this. I'm gonna start speaking Spanish now. Mira, puedo hablar español y definitivamente no estoy usando el traductor de Google. My Hispanic subscribers know what I'm talking about.
Brother, this guy stinks!
Rack Shack and Benny is definitely a turning point for this list. Every episode from here on out is going to be one of my personal favorites from this era of the show. The episode is definitely a mid-tier episode, but a good mid-tier nonetheless.